Have you ever wondered how far a first impression can go? What happens when a world-famous icon walks into a place where no one recognizes him, or worse, where he's treated like he doesn't belong? Tonight, we take a look into a jaw-dropping story from a luxury restaurant in uptown Tokyo. A waiter's biting sarcasm and a series of subtle insults toward none other than Kanye West unfold into an unforgettable tale. You won't believe how this story ends, but first, hit the subscribe button and turn on notification to get more unbelievable stories like this one. Let's get started. The streets of uptown Tokyo shimmered under the glow of streetlights, their beams reflecting off the slick, rain-soaked pavement. The rhythmic drumming of raindrops against car windows filled the cool evening air, setting the mood for a night destined to be anything but ordinary. Nestled among towering skyscrapers and exclusive boutiques stood Brics Cuisine, a high-end restaurant renowned for its sophisticated ambience and clientele of the elite. Inside, the warmth of candlelight flickered against the walls, and the gentle hum of classical music filled the space. Behind the bar, Kelvin adjusted his black bow tie and surveyed the room with a practiced eye. A seasoned professional in his early 30s, Kelvin had worked at Brics Cuisine for nearly a decade, and was known for his sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude. Tonight, however, Kelvin was in no mood to cater to pretentious diners or their extravagant requests, as the rain outside mirrored his mood. Dreary, heavy, and unrelenting. Just as Kelvin was mentally preparing for another long night, the front door opened, and a figure stepped inside. Kanye West, though unrecognizable to most in the restaurant, walked in wearing a baggy sweatshirt, loose pants, and oversized boots from his Ye collection. His hood was slightly damp from the rain, and his laid-back demeanor was a direct opposite sharply with the polished elegance of the restaurant. A brief pause followed his entrance as a few diners turned their heads, but their curiosity faded almost as quickly as it came. Kelvin glanced up and frowned. From his vantage point behind the bar, Kanye's attire seemed completely out of place in Brics Cuisine's upscale setting. He watched as Kanye casually approached the hostess stand, his movements unhurried, as though he were stepping into a neighborhood cafe rather than one of Tokyo's most exclusive dining restaurants. The hostess, Lily, greeted Kanye with a polite smile, though her confusion was evident. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "No reservation, but I'd like a table for one," Kanye replied. Lily hesitated for a split second, glancing around the room, then nodded. "Of course. Right this way." From the bar, Kelvin watched the exchange with mild annoyance. "Another one," he muttered under his breath, already forming an opinion about the diner who didn't seem to belong. As Kanye followed Lily through the dining room, Kelvin's disdain grew. The restaurant was filled with well-dressed patrons, business executives in tailored suits, couples in designer evening wear, as each table was decorated with fine china and crystal wine glasses. Kanye's casual look stood out like a sore thumb. When Lily led him to a table tucked away near the kitchen doors, Kelvin smirked to himself. Fitting, he thought. Not exactly prime seating for someone who looks like they stumbled in from the street. Kanye, however, didn't seem to mind, as he settled into his seat with the same quiet confidence he displayed when he entered the restaurant. He picked up the menu and began scanning it, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the subtle judgment radiating from the staff and nearby diners. From behind the bar, Kelvin shook his head. "This is going to be interesting," he muttered as he grabbed a notepad and made his way toward Kanye's table. The tension between Kelvin and Kanye began the moment Kelvin introduced himself. "Good evening, sir. I'm Kelvin, and I'll be your waiter tonight," he said, his tone professional but lacking warmth. "Would you care for something to drink while you look over the menu?" Kanye looked up briefly. "A glass of Chardonnay, please." Kelvin arched an eyebrow. "Do you have a preference?" "We have a Puligny Montrachet, it's quite popular with our guests, or perhaps something simpler." Kanye hesitated as he was clearly unfamiliar with the options. "Just, whatever you think is good," he said casually. Suppressing a sarcastic smile, Kelvin nodded. "Of course. I'll bring something accessible. His emphasis on the last word wasn't lost on Kanye, who responded with a faint smile. When Kelvin returned with the wine, he placed the glass on the table with deliberate care. Here you go, sir. A Macon Villages. A fine choice for someone who appreciates simplicity. Kanye nodded as he took a sip. It's good, he said, with his voice remaining neutral. As the evening progressed, Kelvin's irritation simmered just beneath the surface. Kanye's relaxed demeanor and puzzling responses seemed to annoy him even more. When Kanye placed his order, he mispronounced one of the dishes, a delicate French entree listed as coquille Saint-Jacques. Ah, I see you'd like the coquille Saint-Jacques, Kelvin said, repeating Kanye's mispronunciation with a hint of mockery. An excellent choice. It's actually coquille Saint-Jacques, but no worries, it's a bit tricky for most people. Nearby diners exchanged glances, sensing the tension but unsure of the context. Kanye remained unfazed, meeting Kelvin's sarcasm with a calm, steady gaze. As Kelvin walked back to the kitchen to place the order, he muttered under his breath, another pretender, trying to act like they belong. The appetizers arrived, and Kelvin placed the plate in front of Kanye with an exaggerated flourish. Your coquille Saint-Jacques, sir, he said, his tone dripping with false courtesy. Do let me know if you'd like recommendations on how to enjoy it. Kanye glanced up at Kelvin, a faint smile playing on his lips. Thanks. I think I've got it. The subtle tension between them hadn't gone unnoticed. At a nearby table, a group of executives leaned in, whispering among themselves. One of them, a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair, looked at Kanye more closely. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, but instead of intervening, he gestured for his colleagues to stay quiet. Let's see how this plays out, he murmured. Back at the bar, Margaret, one of Kelvin's co-workers, watched the scene unfold with a growing unease. Is it just me, or is Kelvin being extra rude tonight? She whispered to another server. He's always like that, the server replied. But yeah, tonight feels different. As Kanye took his time with the appetizer, Kelvin couldn't resist making one final jab. How is it? He asked, I hope it's not too sophisticated for your standard. Kanye paused, his fork midway to his mouth. It's great, he replied simply as his calm demeanor remained undisturbed. For a moment, Kelvin felt a flicker of confusion. Why wasn't this guy reacting the way most people did? Normally, his sarcasm would elicit either an awkward laugh or a defensive remark. But Kanye's unbothered attitude threw him off. As Kelvin walked away, Kanye reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, as his expression was unreadable to others. By this time, the whole dining hall was alive with quiet speculation. Diners exchanged hushed whispers, and the group of executives continued to observe intently. Margaret, still watching from the bar, couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was about to unfold. The evening at Brics Cuisine began to take on a different tone as time went by. The subtle tension between Kanye West and Kelvin had started drawing attention, though neither seemed to acknowledge the growing audience. Across the restaurant, diners exchanged glances, their hushed conversations occasionally punctuated by stolen glances toward the tucked-away table by the kitchen doors. At the center of this quiet storm sat Kanye, his demeanor still relaxed despite Kelvin's increasingly sarcastic comments. He was now casually scrolling through his phone, occasionally looking up with a faint and unreadable smile. Every move seemed intentional, as though he were waiting for something, or someone, to reveal themselves. Seated at a large table near the bar, was a group of entertainment executives who had initially been focused on their discussion about an upcoming film project. However, as Kelvin's sharp remarks grew louder and more pointed, their attention shifted. One of the executives, a middle-aged man in a sleek gray suit, leaned back in his chair and narrowed his eyes toward Kanye's table. His colleagues followed his gaze, as their murmurs turned curious. Doesn't he look familiar? One of them told the other. The man in gray nodded slightly, as his eyes were fixed on Kanye. Give it a minute. I think I know who that is. At another table, a young couple who were celebrating their anniversary noticed the shift in atmosphere. The woman, who was dressed in a long emerald gown, looked at her partner. "Why is everyone looking over there?" she whispered. Her partner shrugged. "Maybe it's some kind of celebrity thing." Meanwhile, Kelvin returned to Kanye's table, balancing a tray of wine glasses. His expression was a mix of irritation and feigned politeness. "Here's the Chablis Premier Cru you asked for," he said, placing the glass on the table. "I hope this one suits your refined taste." Kanye picked up the glass and studied it for a moment. "Looks good," he said simply, taking a sip. Kelvin hesitated, waiting for anything that might suggest his barbed tone had landed. But Kanye remained unbothered, as his calm demeanor was like a wall Kelvin couldn't breach. Frustrated, Kelvin crossed his arms. "You seem to have a unique approach to wine pairings," he said. "Perhaps you'd like me to explain how these things work?" Kanye shook his head, as his cryptic smile returning. "Why not? Educate me." Nearby, Margaret, the observant server who had been silently watching the interaction, frowned deeply. She whispered to another waitress, "He's really pushing it tonight. That guy doesn't seem like the type to take this lightly." The other waitress shrugged. "Maybe he's just clueless. Or maybe he's used to worse." When Kanye inquired about the chef's special for the evening, Kelvin couldn't resist another jab. "It's a foie gras tranche," he said as his voice sank with sarcasm. "But I'm not sure it's the kind of dish you'd appreciate. Perhaps something simpler. The salmon is pretty popular with the less adventurous crowd." Kanye leaned back in his chair, considering the waiter for a long moment. Then he smiled again. "I'll take the foie gras," he said. "And while you're at it, bring out the Chateau Margaux 2010. That should pair well, right?" The mention of the Chateau Margaux, a rare and expensive wine, sent a signal through the restaurant. The group of executives leaned in closer, their eyes widening as they exchanged knowing looks. One of them muttered, "It's him. I'm telling you, it's Kanye West." As Kelvin walked back to the bar to place the order, Margaret intercepted him. "Kelvin, you might want to dial it back," she said urgently. "I think that guy is someone important." Kelvin snorted. "Important? Please. He's just another pretentious nobody trying to act like they belong here." Margaret opened her mouth to argue, but Kelvin had already turned away. At his table, Kanye casually angled his phone to record the room. His smile widened ever so slightly as he captured the growing intrigue around him. The pieces were falling into place, and he was in no rush to reveal his hand. The air in Brics Cuisine grew heavier with anticipation. Gabriella, the restaurant's manager, stepped out from the office at the back of the building, her sharp eyes immediately scanning the room. She noticed the subtle shift in energy, diners leaning toward one another, as the whispers keep growing louder, and all eyes seems to be drawn to a single table. Her gaze followed theirs and landed on Kanye. "Why is everyone looking at table 8? Gabriella asked Margaret as she passed by the bar. Margaret hesitated, unsure of how much to say. "It's the guy Kelvin's been serving. I think he's Kanye West." Gabriella blinked with her brows furrowing. "Kanye West? Are you serious?" Before Margaret could respond, Gabriella walked straight toward the group of executives. "Excuse me," she said softly, addressing the man in the gray suit. "Do you know who that is?" The man nodded, a sly smile playing on his lips. "Oh, it's definitely him. But don't ruin the fun, we're all dying to see how this plays out." Gabriella's stomach dropped. She turned toward Kelvin, who was returning to Kanye's table with a fresh glass of wine in his usual condescending smirk. "Kelvin," she hissed as he passed, "come here for a second." Kelvin paused, annoyed. "What is it? Do you have any idea who that man is?" Gabriella whispered to him. He's just some random guy trying too hard, Kelvin replied dismissively. Gabriella grabbed his arm, her voice low and firm. That random guy is Kanye West. Kelvin froze, his tray wobbling slightly in his hand. Kanye West? The rapper. Yes, Gabriella snapped. Now get back to that table and fix whatever damage you've done. Kelvin's face turned pale as he slowly walked back to Kanye's table. He placed the wine down with trembling hands. Here's your Chateau Margaux, he said with his voice becoming a bit lower than before. Kanye raised an eyebrow, his calm smile still in place. Thanks, he said. For a moment, the silence stretched between them. Then Kanye leaned forward slightly. You know, he said casually, I wasn't always into fine dining. Back when I was working on my first album, I ate ramen for weeks just to save money for studio time. The comment was simple, but its weight was undeniable, as nearby diners gasped softly as the realization dawned. It is him, someone at a far table said. Oh my God, another diner said, pulling out their phone. Kelvin took a step back, as his mind began to race. Everything he'd said, every sarcastic comment, every cutting remark, each one played back in his head like a humiliating highlight reel. Mr. West, I didn't realize, Kelvin stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Kanye leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Realize what? He asked, his tone was light but pointed. Gabriella hurried over, with her face flushed with embarrassment. Mr. West, on behalf of Brics Cuisine, I deeply apologize for any. Kanye raised a hand, cutting her off. No need for that, he said. His gaze shifted back to Kelvin. Sometimes, people show you who they really are. It's simply educational. The words hung in the air, with their clear meaning. The room fell silent, as every eye became fixed on Kanye and Kelvin. Kelvin, who was now visibly shaken, struggled to find the right words. But Kanye didn't seem to be waiting for an apology. Instead, he picked up his glass of wine and took a slow, deliberate sip, as though savoring the moment. Gabriella glanced around, realizing the entire restaurant was watching. Is there anything we can do to make this right, Mr. West? She asked. Kanye set his glass down, a faint smile playing on his lips. We'll see, he said shortly after. The silence that hung over Brics Cuisine after the reveal was almost deafening, as Kelvin stood frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Every cutting remark, every sarcastic glance, each interaction now felt like a mistake too big to fix. Gabriella, the restaurant manager, moved uncomfortably as her eyes were darting between Kanye and Kelvin, bracing for what she assumed would be a possible rebuke. But Kanye leaned forward, breaking the tension with a calm and measured tone. Kelvin, he began, addressing the waiter directly. Do you know what the most fascinating part of tonight has been? Kelvin swallowed hard. I'm not sure, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kanye smiled faintly, his tone devoid of anger. It's not what you said. It's what you didn't realize you were saying. Kelvin blinked, confused, but didn't dare to interrupt. You made assumptions about me, Kanye continued. About what I could afford, where I belonged, who I was. And you didn't hesitate to let those assumptions guide how you treated me. But here's the thing, I've seen this before. Not just in restaurants, but everywhere. People assume they know who I am because of what they see on the surface. And the truth is, they're usually wrong. Kelvin shifted his weight uncomfortably, as he wanted to apologize, but Kanye wasn't finished. See, Kelvin, what you did tonight wasn't just about me. It was a reflection of something bigger, a gap between worlds. People like you and people like me don't often cross paths. And when we do, it's like we're speaking different languages. But instead of reacting, I listened. And you know what? You gave me something real, honesty. Kelvin's eyebrows rose as he said. Honesty? Yes, Kanye said with a nod. You didn't try to flatter me. You didn't put on a show. You spoke your mind, even when it wasn't pretty. That's rare, Kelvin. In my world, people tell me what they think I want to hear, not what they actually believe. You broke that mold. The diners who were still lingering in the restaurant sat spellbound, hanging on Kanye's every word. Even Gabriella seemed caught off guard by the unexpected direction of the conversation. Kanye leaned back in his chair, with his gaze unwavering. I have a proposal for you, he said. Kelvin's heart skipped a beat. A proposal? Yes, Kanye replied. I'm building something, a team of people who can help me bridge the gap between celebrity culture and the real world. People who can tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I think you'd be perfect for it. Kelvin stared, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. You want me to work for you? That's right, Kanye said with a faint smile. I don't need another yes man or someone who's afraid to call me out. I need someone who can see the flaws, point them out, and help me fix them. And tonight, Kelvin, you've proven that you're not afraid to be brutally honest, even when it's risky. Gabriella's jaw dropped. Mr. West, are you serious? Dead serious, Kanye replied, turning back to Kelvin. What do you say? Kelvin stammered as the weight of the offer began sinking in. I don't know what to say. I'm just a waiter. I don't know anything about your world. That's the point, Kanye said. Your perspective is exactly what I need. Think about it. The restaurant fell silent again, the gravity of Kanye's words settling over everyone present. Kelvin could feel. There you go. What would you have done if you were in Kelvin's shoes? Do you think honesty like his can really bridge the gap between two different worlds? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories that remind us how life's unexpected moments can change everything. See you in the next video.